Welcome to the Justice Ethan Show. Today I'm joined by Dr. Robert Toth, known on Twitter as Deeper Thrill. He's the founder of TheIsm.ai. Check that out. Thanks for coming on the show today, Dr. Toth.
You got it. Lovely to be here.
Or do you prefer to go by Deeper Thrill? I feel like it's weird to call someone by their actual Twitter name.
You just say DT, and it applies to both.
DT. That's true. That's true. DT. Rock and roll. I know you've been on some other podcasts, but do you go by your real name at all?
Not often, but I decided to just bite the bullet and say, who cares anymore?
Well, you're the man, and I think that you have the cachet. I don't, and your business has been around for a while. Let's jump kind of into that because it's your core area of expertise. It'll give people some insight into who you are, what you're working on. TheIsm.ai. What have you been doing there for the last nearly a decade?
So, started Theta Tech as a consulting business right after I got my PhD in biomedical engineering. So a little bit of background before that in my education. High school 2005, bachelor's in biomedical engineering in 2009, master's in 2010, PhD in 2013. And then I decided I didn't want to work for a company. I was too, I guess anti-authoritarian would be the word. I'm not a good employee, I would say. So I started my own consulting gig with some of the doctors that I worked with during my PhD on building new ultrasound machines for them and building some new medical AI systems. Since then, I usually have, it fluctuates a little bit, but I have usually about between 4 and 6 main clients at any given time. And we do sort of, 3 to 12 month projects building custom AI systems for people. So that's kind of the overview. I have a couple patents in medical imaging, detecting cancer. I have like 25 papers published in the academic world. So I know that whole publication process in academia, but now I love building the AI and I love doing impactful stuff.
Yeah. And we're going to get to the technical side in a bit. I don't want to dive right into the deep end, but wade in the shallow. Wade into it's gonna get hairy real quick. But the fun stuff first would be, I think, actually how we met. I've been following you on Twitter for years on an old account and now on my current account. You've always been one of the most interesting follows. You've blown up. I think in the last year, your account probably has doubled in size. Mm-hmm. And then, first of all, I just want to, because you weren't always a big account, but you've been kind of a cult classic as long as I've been following you, which is probably from like a few thousand followers. Now you're at like 30,000, 40,000 followers.
You're one of my early followers.
I don't know if that's early, because you've grown so quickly over the last few years, but you've had the account for probably, I don't know, 5 or 10 years.
Something like so. I mean, this account, Deep Thrill, stemmed from the Red Pill. So me and Illimitable Man, now known as Tell Your Son This, we were kind of the early Red Pill people on Reddit. So like the r/Red Pill. This is when that had like, I joined, Illimitable Man joined when it had like 1,000 subscribers. I joined it and had like 2,000 subscribers. Uh-huh. So, I was single at the time. I'm engaged now, but I was single at the time, kind of like learning about my own mission. I was always into lifting, but the Red Pill sort of solidified that, like, lift if you have a problem, lift, which is nice. Yeah. Focus on your mission first. Understand women from an evolutionary psych perspective. So me as kind of like, not really a scientist, but I have scientific training. I like the evolution perspective. I like understanding why males and females act a certain way in the dating pool from kind of that semi-autistic, like hyper-rational, evolutionarily, like, you're doing this to attract the highest quality mate and you're going to branch swing. And this was when Rolo was big. So anyway.
Oh my goodness. I haven't heard his name in a while. Rolo.
Well, he was one of the godfathers of the Red Pill. This was 2013, right? So ancient days. But I
think he must have been banned from Twitter because I haven't seen him on Twitter.
No, he's on Twitter. He just does a lot of self-promotion of his books, I think.
Okay. Maybe I unfollowed almost everybody. Yeah. So, okay. So, early days, I want to know what you did to grow the account. Did you start the account to grow the account? Did you I think one of your claims to fame is that you don't really have a strategy.
Because not that I say. I say a lot of strategy.
You say you often say something along the lines of just write what you want to write.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be so complex. Just write what you want to write.
So I always love the writing aspect of the Red Pill. I like to contribute. And I actually didn't delete any of my old posts. So you'll see my cringy-esque posts from back in the day if you ever look up Deep Thrill on Reddit, but we don't need to go into that. But
no, I've seen other people screenshot them.
Yeah.
From like a GeoCities website or something like that. So.
Oh yeah, Anyway, neither here nor there. I like writing. I love like expanding my thoughts. I think journaling and writing is a good way to kind of tap into some esoteric stuff in the universe and really put it out on paper. Mm-hmm. I just loved writing, and I got kind of sick of the whole red pill mentality, to be honest. Like, I kind of outgrew it. I was 26, 27 at the time when that was a big part of my life. Mm-hmm. Didn't really need it anymore when I hit like 27, 28. So I'm just like, Reddit's not the place for me. It was too pseudo-intellectual. I needed to expand further. So I joined Twitter because Illuminable Man was on Twitter, and he kind of told me that that's probably a good method. So I joined Twitter, and my view of Twitter was always the follower count I have is a metric of my thoughts, but it's not something I optimize for. Mm-hmm. It's like, I just want to write to influence the world in a positive way. And if people want to listen to it, great. If they don't, whatever. They're not my people. I'm not for everybody. So I really just, I'll have some whiskey and write some trash talk online. I'll go into a deep AI thread about the nitty gritty of loss functions and neural networks. I'll just do whatever's on my mind. To me, it's like a digital diary, an outlet for me. And it helps me. Twitter forces you to make concise thoughts, which is bad because you trend towards platitudes, but it's good because it forces you to coalesce the long thoughts in your head into something that is digestible. So
right.
I just write. I have 31,000 followers now. Mm-hmm. I was anonymous on Deep Thrill all the way up until this November.
Yeah.
So I only showed my face in November.
The face reveal, I was like, oh my gosh, he's a human being. Like a real one, because we thought you were a robot. Everyone thought you were just a super complicated.
This is a deep fake video. What are you guys talking about? I'm from the future.
No. Well, that's the next question, because I know people who have met you in person from Twitter, and so you've made friends along the way. And this to me is the most interesting aspect of Twitter. I think it's the most interesting aspect for most people, and most people who go on to Twitter with the interest of making money. Realize early on that they're going to have to be in DMs and making friends along the way. So, but I wanted you to talk a little bit about, the human interactions that you've had with people. We met through DMs, but I'm sure you've had more interesting conversations than the ones that you've had with me. So yeah, share some stories.
First time I met anyone in person, Philosopher is the guy, Heroic Bill, he used to be called. He's a friend of mine and lives in New York City as well. He offered to meet up. I said, sure, why not? This is early 2019. Then Garrett Daly, who's on Twitter as Libera Rex. We can maybe put some like captions underneath this with people's Twitter handles.
Yeah, I'll add them to the show notes. Yep.
He organized a retreat in the mountains of North Carolina. He brought Billy Redhorse, otherwise known as the Gentleman Mystic. He brought Chief Chuck, who I don't know if you know, but he basically made a retreat of 12 people, and no one had ever seen me before. I was anonymous, and no one, when you're anonymous on Twitter, you don't know if you're like a cool dude or just some like loser in your mom's basement. Like, you don't really know. But I showed up, and people were like, this guy's like legit. Like, you talk about self-improvement. It was cool. Since then,
you were just a green eye avatar for a long time.
Well, it's kind of like that HAL 2000 thing, but green. Green's my favorite color. Yeah,
and you really pioneered, I think, the sort of mystique tweeting thing, where you would make jokes about being an AI. I think Eigenbot does this now, but you also actually have other accounts that are bots, and so what it does is it creates this weird illusion where when you see a bot that's saying something that's sort of vaguely DP-esque, you're like, is this him? It's probably not.
You got to cultivate a bit of mystery to keep the interest on you.
Yeah. I think everyone on Twitter eventually gets to the point where they're like, I'm going to hang this up. But you've got 30,000 followers. So like, what's the vision? What's the end game?
Well, since being in New York City, it's a nice hub. So I get to meet people as they're traveling through it. Like J.K. Molina traveled through New York City. Got to meet up with him a few months ago. As people go through New York City, I will randomly meet up with them. Maybe they have a layover on a flight somewhere else, whatever. So that's nice to be able to meet up with people and be in a consolidated, like, major hub of the world. Most people hang it up, but, like, I was never doing this for a purpose anyway. So there's nothing for me to hang up. It's like, I'll take 2 weeks and never write a tweet. I'll take 2 weeks and go on a binge and writing tweets. I just keep it because it's a good outlet. But the vision is like, when I started this and I started thinking a lot about what is the future of things, and this was 2016, 2017, the future to me of people who lead are going to be digital symbols. And the future world, like any cyberpunk movie, is probably going to be pretty close to reality, I think, in terms of cities, where like it's going to be a futuristic digital world. There's going to be thought leaders that are all digital. And my vision is I wanted to connect early with people who I saw were also going to be thought leaders. Me and I am connected. I video chatted with him. I'm one of the only people who have seen his face, I think, but like 2014. It's like Ajax, him and I have been following each other now for like 6 years. Like, I just like connecting with people that I see are visionary and are going to be the thought leaders 10 years from now. I want to cultivate that group of like-minded people early, and we can all influence each other together. So my vision is like make my account one of the thought leaders, but also connect with people before they're big. By the time they're big, they're too far gone to me, and they're too conformist in a way. I like catching people early.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're actually, I feel like now you're at the point where you're probably,
God, don't say it.
you have to say no to things. I was very happy that you were willing to take on this interview, so you're really in that liminal space from between where you're just going to have too much inbound to deal with it. Mm-hmm. This is a great segue, talking about the future, into your area of expertise, AI, ML, deep learning specifically. I didn't read your paper, but I did read several of the titles.
That's a lot.
It's a little, I mean, I'm a developer, but, and as I've argued many times, actually, on other podcasts, I think that machine learning, data science is a fundamentally more intractable set of skills. And what I mean by that is, when, as a developer, as a programmer, you've got a set of sort of primitives that are, functions, variables, loops, conditionals. These are your primitives. They don't get exponentially more complex. But as you, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but with machine learning, you're starting with a set of mathematical primitives, and as they layer upon one another, they become so obtuse to the human that you can't understand really what's going on in the totality. So first of all, can you just define some terms for us? Artificial intelligence is the broad school of making machines do human-like things. Machine learning is more specifically like a school within artificial intelligence. Deep learning is neural network related, right? These are the definitions. Talk a little bit about the deep learning that you're working on and sort of what makes it more sophisticated than your, run-of-the-mill linear regression.
So, deep learning didn't really explode until 2012.
Right.
And machine learning is kind of like making computers find patterns and make a prediction from that pattern. Mm-hmm. Back when I was starting out, I was like 19 years old. I was looking at MRI images, and like there's certain textures on the MRI image that are indicative of cancer and others that are indicative of not cancer. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it was just the coolest thing that you can break an image down into just the matrix of numbers, and the computer can find patterns on those numbers. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing people don't realize is that AI these days is very much pattern memorization. It's not actually what you would call human intelligence, simply because it doesn't do inductive and deductive reasoning. Mm-hmm. We can reason through things. We can have a creative thought, like Einstein's creative thought, that like space and time are the same thing, and it's kind of like bowling balls on it, and that's what gravity, like that's a creative thought that like machine learning doesn't know.
You might want to define inductive and deductive reasoning for people.
It's like,
I mean, deductive reasoning is what Sherlock Holmes does, like given
a set of like facts, put them together creatively and come up with a novel conclusion.
Right. And then induction is the process of making predictions about the future based on a pattern of past behavior.
Yeah, so it's like computers sort of do inductive reasoning, but they don't reason like a human. Like we reason kind of scatterbrained, but also linear.
Right.
We say like, given this, given that, given this is what I think. Mm-hmm. And we can like kind of think through things in our head. Computers don't do that. Computers, you show it a million examples of weather station data around the world, it'll predict tomorrow's weather. Cool. Mm-hmm. You show it a million images of cats or dogs, it'll tell you what's in the image. Mm-hmm. You show it a million images of cancer and not cancer, it'll tell you if there's cancer. Computers just do massive pattern memorization right now. Some things are more modern, like recurrent neural networks that they use for video games, where you get rewards for certain actions, and the computer kind of memorizes what to do to get a reward in a video game, and the computers can now beat every human at Go and chess and some games like StarCraft. Not really all games, but like still, it's memorizing patterns. It's not thinking through things. It's not being creative. That's what the difference is.
And in your case, you're doing pattern recognition or image classification on medical imagery. Is that right?
Mostly. I've had like 1 or 2 clients that have had me do it on like finding infringing like counterfeit images on e-commerce websites. That was a cool project.
Okay.
Because like you could just scan an image and my AI would say, is this a counterfeit purse or a real Gucci purse or whatever it is. Anyway, besides that though, most of the clients I have are medical images. So they'll throw MRI images at me or heart rate signals at me, and I have to predict if there's cancer or not, or if this patient has heart disease or not. So that's kind of an overview of the type of work I do.
So now we're getting into the deep end of my knowledge. I would guess that you would use something like a convolutional neural network, generally speaking, for image recognition or image classification. Is that right? But that's sort of a broad class of algorithms. I'm really at the edge of what I know here, so please tell me when I'm getting wrong. But I understand convolutional neural networks are a sort of broad class of algorithms, and there's sort of a number of branches of that tree that you could shake down. Where do you land in that family of algorithms?
So back before 2012, when I was doing my PhD and master's and all that, you basically create filters on the images and you get textures out of those, and then you use those textures to classify if a given pixel is cancer or not. Convolution neural networks kind of exploded when AlexNet won the ImageNet competition, and it got 86% accuracy, where all the runner-ups got 75% accuracy. It was the first time they used graphics cards to be able to train neurons.
Yeah.
That was the breakthrough. Convolution neural networks are basically, instead of having textures that you think are important, like, oh, we think edges are important, or we think a blob here and a blob there, then the square root of the blob there is important. No. You let the computer figure out what filters best predict cancer, not cancer, or cat, dog, whatever. Convolutions are like filters of filters of filters. It's very hierarchical.
Right.
Now, when I was doing my PhD, you kind of get into the nitty-gritty of making your own networks. You make your own algorithms. That's not a wise approach. I'm running a business. I'm not just an engineer anymore. I'm a business owner. That's not an efficient approach. Google, Facebook, they're spending billions and billions of dollars hiring PhDs and coming up with neural networks that they're training on millions of dollars worth of servers. Like, you don't really want to come up with your own stuff anymore. So these days, they've come up with clever neural network architectures. The most popular ones that I use are called Inception and ResNet. Now, there's just different ways to define the neurons inside of this convolution. There's just, and they figured out what works practically. AI is a very practical endeavor. It's not theoretically this should work, doesn't matter. Does it give you the results or not? So these days, you kind of use these modern libraries like fast.ai, h2o.ai, K-train. Those are the 3 big ones I use, and in 5 lines of code, it downloads a model for you from the internet. It runs it on your data. It's trained, and in 5 to 7 lines of code, you have a cutting-edge convolutional neural network that just spits out the right result for you.
Right.
Then the research part is tinkering with it, defining your data. There's 1,000 things that you still have to do as the engineer, but you don't really want to be building your own networks anymore. It's not a smart approach. If you're tinkering and you're a hobbyist, great. Play around with it, learn the math, learn the calculus, whatever. But from a business perspective, I don't have time for that shit. I gotta use the cutting edge stuff, see how it works, return results to my client within a week, and they need to know what to do.
Right.
So there's practical considerations too, in addition to the modern convolution neural networks.
I mean, in programming, we often talk about how powerful a programming language is, meaning how easy does the language make it for you to weaponize the abstractions that are available to you and provide value at the end of the day. And so I think that's kind of what you're talking about here with fast AI and other learning frameworks. I want to talk a little bit. I want to give people like myself, especially actually, but let's say your average web developer, somebody who's pretty sharp, but maybe doesn't have the mathematical fundamentals or the schooling that you might normally find in data science. What are some of the core kind of concepts that you would go and drill to start being useful to, let's say, a consultant like you who's doing this kind of work?
Data cleanliness. garbage in, garbage out is a common phrase in computer science. It's doubly important in AI. The key part of a lot of this is formatting your data in maybe an Excel sheet that you can send to Google, and Google's AI will spit out a result. Formatting your images in the right way to feed into the AI. It's so important, like defining your experiments. One time when we started this, some of the other people I was working with, they accidentally had the same patient in their training set and their test set. You don't, like, it's gonna memorize the same pattern and you think you have good results. You don't. You need to define your experiments very well. You want 30% left out of your training set to pretend what would happen in the real world. You want to think about if the data came from 2 different hospitals. That matters. So the data, like, cleanliness part of it is so important in the AI. That's where to start. Secondly, Kaggle. Kaggle is this. It's so crucial because it's this website where companies or people put bounties for solving AI problems, and you compete for like $10,000 to $100,000 to make the best AI. Kaggle's so important because it shows what practically works and what practically doesn't work. Forget about all the blogs you read about what should work and what shouldn't work, all the papers, whatever. Yeah. You want to see what actually works on real life problems. And that's why Kaggle and websites like Kaggle, where they actually have real life data sets that you have to cut your teeth on, that's important too.
Yeah. And Kaggle's got a lot of great tutorial resources, that kind of thing. I was recently taking their advanced SQL classes, and great content over there. All right, so we're gonna start to wrap up some of these technology questions, but like I want to know, who do you admire most in your field? Like who's challenging you to do better work?
Honestly, it's the DeepMind company that Google bought for like $3 billion. They write really good AI stuff that wins like board games. Yeah. When you can make an AI play a board game, especially if it's not a board game like chess or Go where there's full information, if there's like that fog of war like StarCraft, or I guess like World of Warcraft, or like, I don't really know, I don't play that many video games, but like if you can make an AI play a board game or a video game, that to me is impressive, because that's hard. There's like it's not just like clicking at the right time. It's like understanding complex strategies with other players. Like that to me is what I'm impressed by. People who can make AI win video games and board games.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for someone to make an AI wash the dishes for me. That would be great.
Your little like
early. It was so close.
Jetsons. Who's the AI made?
Rosie, I think it's Rosie.
Yeah. That's that. Yeah.
You brought up the DeepMind, but I wanted to ask about OpenAI and the Copilot. Have you heard of Copilot?
Oh yeah, GitHub's new. They'll fill out the code for you.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe talk about what that is, because we're still pretty early, and I'm curious about your take on it.
Well, so that's a little different than what I do. That's very language-based AI. GPT-3 and all that stuff is natural language processing AI, where AI can write a poem or AI can write a piece of code for you. So a lot of companies now, AI can write copy. If you go to copy.ai, the website, AI will write your sales copy for you. So like GitHub is the popular framework where everyone stores their code. They can now sort of auto-fill out some of your code as you start typing, just the way Google now has it in Gmail. If you start typing an email, it'll kind of in gray say what it thinks you're going to say next. So it's like predictive language. What's the next line of code you're going to write? It'll fill it out for you. What's the next line in the email you're going to write? It'll fill it out for you. So they're really the same technology, but code is important because it has to actually compile and work.
Here's the cultural question, which is, so GitHub trains this AI on all of the open source code that's on GitHub. And then everybody's upset because, oh, you're using my code to train your AI. And first of all, any developer that's thought about it for 2 seconds knew that this was coming, right? Like I'm actually, okay, I'll tell you this on the show. I'm pretty sure that in 2017, I applied for a job at GitHub, and they ask you like, what kind of project would you work on? And I'm pretty sure I wrote down the concept for Copilot. I was like, oh, I'd love to just do a data analysis on all the code on GitHub and do like prediction on code blocks, so that when I start typing a method definition or something, it'll give me some ideas as to how I could frame the code. And So I'm pretty sure that I gave them this idea and they just
ran with it. Being too early is just as bad as being too late.
Yeah, well, no, and yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm a big believer in giving your ideas away because you're not going to roll them all anyway, so you might as well give them away. Anyway, GitHub, you should at least credit me for that idea. What do you think about this? I mean, is it ethical for GitHub to train this AI on all the open source code?
I mean, that's the point of open source. If you wanted to close source the code, use a license on the code that prohibits that. Like, that's why you have licenses on your code. You're actually in the license right. when you start a new GitHub project. It says, what license do you want? Do you want the MIT license? Do you want the GPL or LGPL or closed source? I mean, I have my client codes on GitHub, but it's private, so like they're not going to train it on that. So like, I don't know, quit whining, right?
Yeah, this is the real question: is why do people who write code for a living and then give it away get upset when people take advantage of it? I don't know.
No idea. That's why I don't open source my code.
Well, nobody opens. Yeah, the valuable stuff, unless it's like a framework or something, doesn't normally get open source.
I mean, I was surprised that Google open sourced their TensorFlow framework, but their business model is different. They're trying to sell you server, not the code itself.
Okay, so now we're going to get into the real deep end, which is.
Oh, that wasn't the deep end?
No. This is all surface level nonsense. I mean, I love technology. I love writing code. I think it's a fascinating place to be in. What I like to say is that there's two kinds of technology. There are arcs and there are towers. And arcs save people from floods, and towers crumble when the builders get too prideful. And so, which leads us to some of these kind of futurism questions. I'm like, where are you? You work in AI. For years, the hot topic was, the singularity's right around the corner, 2035, 2040 for sure. I think people stopped talking about it when they realized that self-driving cars weren't going to be normal in 2020, right? Like in 2015, people were like, we're going to have cars driving themselves in 2020. Well, we didn't get there. We're probably not going to hit singularity in 2040. But if we do, are we? What are the ramifications of it? Is there a simulation? Are we in a simulation? These are the questions. So, I mean, where do you land on this?
These are the unanswerable questions you're asking. How do you know? If you're in a simulation, you can't know if you're in a simulation.
Right. But the argument is that given that we're about to make a simulation, it's like Fermi's paradox, but at the cosmic scale.
It's like fractal in a way.
It is.
Like if we can make a video game simulation, it's reasonable to expect a higher being, like in the Matrix, made us as a simulation.
Right.
I mean,
you are theistic, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
100%.
So we're going to start with where we agree. We're definitely both theists, meaning there's a creator, right? At minimum. Okay. But then, so then we're in a simulation, right? Or more or less.
Maybe. I mean, the KYBALION's view in esotericism is that reality is the imagination of God. Not it's separate and created. It's that it's like we are cells in a body, in a way.
The what view?
KYBALION.
What is this?
KYBALION. KYBALION. It's a book from the early 1900s that kind of like exposed. It's a short book. It's like 100 pages, and it's out of copyright, so you can read it online, or you can read our summary of it on KIBOOKCLUB.com. But we'll get to that. I mean, it's just kind of like the secret society Illuminati view, in a way. It kind of tried to say like what the ancient Egyptians believed, that reality is the imagination of God. Not there was a creator separate from us, but we are like cells in a giant body. So I think that view is reasonable. I mean, fractals are super cool. You can go into the Mandelbrot set, which was only discovered in like the 1950s, so it's pretty new technology.
Right.
I mean, we can get into like psychedelics and DMT elves, and there's 1,000 directions to go with this. But
the fractal argument is the argument that is what got me out of atheism. Right. Like I could not square. It seemed less probable to me that consciousness would arise out of a non-consciousness,
like rocks and chemicals.
Well, it's just it would be wholly original in our experience, right? Like there's nothing in our experience that we look at that did not come from something like itself. So how could you get consciousness? How could you get intelligence? How could you get morality? There must be a form of those things that exists at the higher level. So, but this was like I came around to that conclusion before I ever became a Christian. I came around to that conclusion, in college, just thinking, well, there must be a God because you can't have consciousness, you can't have intelligence, you can't have morality. None of these things can exist. I mean, in the counter argument, the atheist counter argument is like this primordial ooze sort of Daniel Dennett consciousness is an emergent property of evolution. But that's, I mean, again,
consciousness is a means to an end to better survive and perpetuate genes, right? That's the atheist view.
Right. Well, but also that it's an emergent property.
It wasn't built in from the start. It came about when you combine a bunch of neurons. It just, it's an illusion, and we just experience consciousness, but it's not innate. That's that view.
Which seems like a much greater leap of faith than just consciousness is itself a thing, which is how we can identify it.
Okay, so I mean, this comes back to the simulation argument. I mean, that argument's been around since like simulacra. There's like an old book like thousands of years ago that kind of said maybe it's simulation. I mean, the Matrix movie is the perfect like way to describe it, like Plato's cave. I mean, I don't know, the simulation argument, you can't know. There's other arguments that are more modern, like the holographic universe theory, where if you shine a light through a crystal and it displays a 3D view, every little sliver of that crystal, if you shine a light through it, has the full picture, just a lower resolution. So if you shine a light through the whole crystal, you get the high resolution version of the 3D holograph. If you shine a light through a small little, like you shave off a little sliver and shine a light through it, it actually contains the full image, just a lower resolution. But then you still like, where'd the light come from? So you don't, I mean, it's like a circular reasoning, and we might not be able to answer that.
Okay.
Singularity is different. Yeah, go ahead.
No. Continue if you were going to talk about singularity, because people are going to need to know what we mean by that.
Singularity, I think even people get it wrong what that even means. I mean, people think it's like killer robots that are too smart for us, and it's an out-of-control AI that's just hyper-intelligent, and we just can't turn it off. Like the button, there's no off button is the idea. But to me, it's like singularity is when AI can write its own AI code. So if an AI writes an AI code, and then that AI code writes better AI code, and the AI code has an exponential growth of intelligence, when AI can code itself. That, to me, is a singularity. That's exponential. That's recursive.
Well, in that case, we're nearly there by that definition.
Maybe, but like code is inherently a creative endeavor, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, like, could an AI have written the modern resonant architecture? I don't know. AI these days can try a whole bunch of architectures and see what works.
Yeah.
But we have to give it the seed. It can't really just come up with its own ideas on its own.
Yeah. Have you read Stephen Myers at all?
I've not.
Okay, so Stephen Myers wrote Signature in the Cell. It's a defense of intelligent design based on complex information being found in DNA. Because you don't find complex specified information anywhere in nature except where an intelligent creator wrote the code. So that's his argument. So Shakespeare and the monkeys, right? I get into a lot of trouble for this because
monkeys typing a million things would eventually come up with Shakespeare.
Yeah, but they wouldn't. I'm firmly on the side of you could have as many monkeys as you wanted, infinite monkeys. It wouldn't matter. They would never write Shakespeare, and it's not because like people say, oh, well, randomness. Eventually, you'll get any combination. But it doesn't. That's not true. Like it doesn't actually exist. It's a thought experiment. Like you can't actually. And so I have a friend. His name's Jesse Anderson. He's brilliant. Like I don't know if he's actually autistic, but he's smart like an autistic person. Like incredibly like genius level type of guy. You know, he's thinking like 8 moves ahead in chess when we play. Anyway, so he spins up a bunch of Google Cloud servers, writing random characters, and he gets it to generate Shakespeare to prove the point. And well, how did he do it? Well, he did it by having like a copy of Shakespeare that you would match the letters against, because that's the only way that it could be done is if someone had already figured out, like the intelligence had already figured out Shakespeare, and then you can match against it. And so my whole point is that I don't buy the whole randomness argument. Things will just fall into place.
I think you also keep in mind it's like randomness and chaos could be infinite and never create the pocket of order that happens to be Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Like there's infinite other things that could have
exactly. They're infinitely more versions of nothing that it could have generated. Which, you know, I mean, it gets you back down to the primordial ooze thing. The whole premise of primordial ooze is that there's just not even molecules, atoms bumping around that eventually form molecules, that eventually form proteins, that eventually form enzymes. And it's just like, no. That would never. Okay. So then, which
I
gives
think
me
instinct is a way to reconcile that.
Instinct.
If like chemical things have the instinct to covalently bond, it's like the instinct to cluster. Like, where does intelligent organisms and even intelligent society stem from? Clustering too many people together and then having them figure out how to structure that. That's how governments emerged in the first city, Mesopotamia and stuff. Like, when cells all clustered together and they were all the same cell reproducing asexually, while they were too tightly knit together and the heat kind of made them all like jittery, they had to start specializing. One cell had to be the boundary of a meta-organism. Another cell had to turn into the liver millions of years later. Like, when you cluster too much together and squeeze it all together, that's when intelligent complexity emerges to me.
Yeah, which returns to the fine-tuning argument for God, which is how would you the conditions which would create the sort of instinct or the, I guess you'd call them like the locking, like whatever the puzzle pieces are or the shape of the puzzle piece that allows these things to kind of fit together. Like what designs that, which gets me actually to the most interesting sort of philosophical school I've been investigating recently is presuppositional apologetics. So the question for any atheist now basically comes down to, well, okay, your worldview needs to justify the discussion itself, right? Like if we have these questions about, okay, where does the order in the universe come from? Where does the moral imperative in the universe come from? You can't just ask the question, does God exist? You have to answer, if God doesn't exist, how do I account for these other things that necessarily must be? Like there must be order in the universe. There must be some basis for the inductive principle. There must be
like the idea of patterns. Like what created the bucket that holds the idea of patterns or the laws of physics.
Right. And not only that, but what keeps it all into place? Because even if there are patterns, laws of physics, laws of logic, laws of morality, you know, in this like random universe of the atheist, maybe those just instantiate randomly, but how do they stay in place? Like on what basis are they continually?
Well, you could say survival. The ones that tend to survive are the ones that perpetuate survival itself.
But that is itself, if it survives, you're saying if it survives, then they will continue to survive, and that defines what is. But the problem is, why are we able to make an assertion or come to any conclusion whatsoever based on survival? Like, why is it that survival logically leads to more survival? It doesn't, without some kind of what you said, something holding the patterns in place. There's no explanation for it. And this is what so the presuppositional school, they basically bring up Bertrand Russell, who was an atheist, and Bertrand Russell admitted that we cannot solve the problem of induction through like a secular lens. There's no primary cause there.
Yeah, you need the concept of reasoning first before you can reason through the concept of reasoning. It gets very wonky really fast.
so the theist reasoning from presuppositional apologetics can basically say, well, like we cannot even have a discussion unless you're already theistic, because
there's 1,000 assumptions built in, like Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Right. Like, because you can't, the Gödel's incompleteness. Thank you. Someone else who knows about Gödel. Yeah. Because every time I bring up Gödel, I'm just like, nobody understands what.
Well, that's what Stephen Hawking said in his last year of life. Why he didn't think there would ever be a equation theory of everything, because Gödel's incompleteness theorem says that any system of numbers or equations are built on that has assumptions in it. You can't break out of that knot in a way.
Right. A formal system of logic can be consistent internally, but once you step outside of the system of logic, you can find all sorts of holes in it. Yes. Okay. So because I knew that you were theistic because you talk like a theist, but but you also have a lot of esoteric type of tweets coming out, and I'm curious like what your influences are, what led you to kind of, I don't know what I'd call it. I don't want to, esotericism. Is that sort of broadly speaking what you're interested in?
I guess I just, it's always a question of like, what is imagination? Where does the instinct of creativity come from? When I get lost in the code and I'm in flow state and I can just kind of like be a craftsman and sense the next line of code I have to write, or like, I always use the Einstein example. He just came up with general relativity, that space and time are the same thing. And gravity is not a force, but a little bubble in it that attracts like a sink. Anyway, this is just creative thoughts. Like, where does creativity come from? Where does flow state come from? When I have an instinct, or you feel like love, or like all of that. It's just kind of like interesting. But more than that, like you have to think of like, maybe there's underlying patterns. Like if you think of a raindrop in a hurricane, it's an example I like to use. A raindrop only knows what its surrounding raindrops are doing. It's bumped into things. It thinks it's all chaotic. It just doesn't feel like it's being, shifted in any way. But when you zoom out and look at the satellite view, that raindrop is subject to these giant patterns across hundreds of miles. But from the raindrop's perspective, it only knows its immediate surrounding. It can't view the large scale, because a large scale trend, a pattern, to the raindrop, it's so subtle. It's like a thousandth of a percent nudging it in general towards that swirl. But the raindrop doesn't experience that. So I think that perspective makes me think of esotericism. It makes me think of like, maybe I was fated to talk to you today. Maybe 1,000 things had to line up, or maybe not. Maybe it's all random. I don't know. I sense that like when I meditate, you really tap into something that's kind of like half a dream, but half not. It's like, what is the fact that like a robot can take actions in reality, but a robot doesn't have an internal representation of like seeing something. It doesn't see. It just goes. Its mechanical circuits just make it go something. There's the Chinese room experiment. You ever heard of that?
I have, but describe it for the audience.
So it's like if someone was in a room and didn't know Chinese, but it had an instruction book of saying, if this is the input, this is what you have to say is the output, and in Chinese characters. From the outside of that room, it kind of seems like the person in the room knows Chinese because they're responding correctly. That doesn't mean the person in the room actually experiences Chinese. Or, someone who maybe, if there was like an animal that literally couldn't see color, could they even conceptualize what red is? They can describe the wavelength. They could, do all the analysis of it, but can they actually see red? So, like, when this touches onto AI as well, like AI doesn't see things the way a human sees things. We look out and we have like this internal like movie in our head of what's going on live. That subjective experience of the current moment is something that like, where does that come from? That's why I think esotericism is interesting. And it's also like math. Like math is just like so far beyond, like advanced math is so far beyond the human brain that's like, it feels like math was already there and we're discovering a proof. We don't invent a proof. You discover a proof.
I mean, when you say esotericism makes sense, but then at the same time you say, well, it might be randomness, right? Like I feel pretty comfortable saying it's not. It's not randomness. Like
instinctually, it feels like it's not random, right?
Well, not only. I think that somehow the very act of considering it and making the argument disproves that randomness is at the basis of it, right? Like it can't, we couldn't even be having these conversations. Like randomness does not beget anything but randomness. I mean, and I just would challenge anyone to prove me wrong, right? Like just show me one instance of where chaos without the external application of any kind of force or design begets anything orderly. Like it just doesn't happen. And so yeah, go ahead.
Chaos theory is interesting. So one of the things, there's a good Wikipedia page called The Edge of Chaos. So if you think of like chaos as the ocean and perfect order as the beach, chaos is like completely random, like everything's just popping up, like blah, 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 white noise, whatever. Order is like a completely static, perfectly structured hierarchy, perfect order. But all the interesting stuff doesn't happen on those. It happens at the edge of chaos where the waves are crashing onto the beach.
Right.
That's where stuff happens between the edge of chaos. And that's where the interesting and intelligence, like we're not perfect orders. Like there's chaotic things that happen. We're not perfect chaos either. But the edge of chaos is where the waves are on the beach. That's where the interesting stuff happens, where the foam of the wave is on the beach, not the ocean and not the beach itself.
Yeah, yeah. And the biblical motif for this is the excursion into the wilderness, right? Like Moses being driven into the wilderness before saving the Israelites. You've got Jesus going into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights of fasting. This is like deeply archetypal type of conception of things. Okay, before we run out of time, I want to make sure that you get to talk about the Key Book Club. Like, what is it? the fact that you've got multiple businesses going is pretty remarkable. What's the Key Book Club?
Key Book Club is, at its core, it's condensed knowledge. It's summarizing. We summarize books. We are starting to summarize podcasts. That's like the simplistic view, though. It's a little bit more than that. It's we choose books that are going to resonate with me, and if you follow me, it's going to resonate with you too. Like, we'll do the books that Blinkist won't touch. We'll do like The Craft of Power or like Dark Manipulation or like some weird books that but we curate them. We don't have 3,000, 5,000 books. We have 300 books that are the well-chosen books. Key Book Club is, we're trying to make it a cultural phenomenon too, where the density of knowledge in those books is something I pride ourselves in. The quality is higher than anyone else because we care about it. We go through training exercises of how do we pack more knowledge into this. So, and it's futuristic too. It's like the library of tomorrow with our attention spans these days is not going to be a library of books in my head. It's going to be a library of summaries. We have that esoteric secret society feel for the brand. We want you to feel like you're in an exclusive elite club. Like, if you're here and you want to be, the next, if you want to be the deep state, we'll give you the strategy guides to get there. Like, our mission is not just to make a simple business that's just summarizing it for everyone. It's for the futuristic elites, which ties into Deep Thrill. Because, like I said, my original view of that was like, let's connect with the people who are going to be the thought leaders of tomorrow. This is, let's find the knowledge of tomorrow that's going to be common knowledge, but let's get ahead of the game now and really warp and shape things in a positive direction. Like, we don't touch politics books, but we'll do books that analyze politics from an outside perspective.
Made me think that you should think about doing Kissinger's books.
I think that'd be cool.
You would, yeah. World Order is a tremendous, intellectual work of art. It's really great. Okay, cool. Definitely check out Key Books. I need to get on that as well.
I want to make sure. Key Book Club, KI Book Club.
I Book Club. Where did you get the name from? What does that mean?
KI is kind of an acronym, stands for Knowledge Incarnate. What would knowledge be if it was a physical entity? Would it be a business? Would it be a person? So KI actually stands for Knowledge Incarnate. Okay.
Would it be a key?
There's reasons we chose it as well.
Do you have any other plugs? Asked for the audience. Anything you want to shamelessly self-promote before you?
Yeah. Go? So I actually am starting to teach AI on weekly webinars.
Okay.
I'm doing stuff like this format where I'm going to video teach and people can ask questions. AI. So deepthrill.com I'll always update that with the latest webinar. So I'm going to be doing 1 hour a week webinars. Price will be between like $20 and $60, depending on the complexity of the topic. But we're basically selling tickets for weekly webinars on deepthrill.com. That's my plug.
Awesome. And I'll make sure that gets in the show notes as well. That's it for this episode of the Justice Epen Show. Thank you again to our guest, Dr. Robert Toth, a.k.a. Deeper Thrill of Theta Tech. And once again, I'm Justice Epen. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast player. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So add me on all of those and join us again next week for the Justice Epen Show. Mic drop. And yeah, we'll cut when we're done. But just before you go. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Oh, you do great. You're brilliant. You're one of the smartest people I follow on Twitter. And yeah, man, it's been an honor to have you on. I'm glad we got to hit all of these topics. I feel like there definitely we could have. First of all, what did we miss that you would have liked to have gotten into?
Futurism. I'd like to talk about futurism a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. I want to. So, have you met Dryden and Charlie or any of those guys from Praxis yet? Did you look at what they're doing?
Oh, yeah. I followed one of them. I reached out. I actually didn't get a chance to look at what they're doing, but I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, Blue Book Cities. They're trying to do charter cities. I know there's like a few different companies trying to do this, but I think that first of all, they've actually got like real estate that they've invested in and people living there, so it's a little bit more real.
I like that. I think that's important.
Oh, yeah, and I think they've got a house in Soho, actually. So you can probably meet them.
Maybe I'll go see them in person. Yeah.
Well, I was actually thinking it would be cool to get you and Dryden, Ani, and maybe this one other guy who is trying to plan like a new World's Fair. If we could get you guys all in a room for like a panel discussion, because this, first of all, there's like this school of like there. It seems to me that there's kind of this school emerging of. I would call them neoclassicists, but I think that they call them like Dryden calls it hero futurism, which is so it's so aspirational, and I love it. I'm very aspirational, so I love it. But I think realistically, it's neoclassicism, right? It's like neoclassicism. They're trying to.
It's like taking the best of the old architecture, bringing it to new cities, sort of idea.
Yeah. Like they really lean on the archetypal expressions of beauty, but they do it sort of under the veneer of futurism, which is I think this is an intersection like a lot of our people are in, because we're all. This corner of Twitter is what I mean. They're like red pilled. Alpha weightlifting, like meat eating people, you know what I mean? But they just wish that the world was more beautiful and less stupid. So, yeah,
chat aesthetics.
Chat aesthetics, exactly. Well, yeah, it's. I mean, it's so ironic to me that the people who are most sort of dogmatically attached to the idea of objective beauty are also just these like grunting cavemen types, like. I feel like I'm one of them. You know what I mean? Like
it's like primitive in a way. It's like primitive beauty.
Yeah. Well, it's a return. It's a return. Because okay. I always use this as an example. Okay. If you go and you read a letter from Robert E. Lee in the late 1800s.
General. Yeah.
Yeah. The General Robert E. Lee. He was about 1,000 times more eloquent than anyone I know. Right. Or anyone we know. Right. I can't even conceive of even a military general today being as morally thoughtful and eloquent as General Robert E. Lee. So we have fallen far intellectually. I mean, we are really, in a sense, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, but also we've been chopped off at the knees. And so, we couldn't walk even without them, and we wouldn't even know how to walk. I mean, you're a smart guy, but like if you and I got stuck out in the woods. Like we'd be dead in like a couple weeks, probably. Or maybe not, but anyway, I guess just my point is that I feel like we are maybe the beginning of a fourth turning, and that the next generation will be much wiser than we are in a lot of ways. Just 'cause I think we've really been cut off at the knees. Like the millennial generation. I mean, our great minds are advertising developers. Right?
Yeah, I know. I think too, like if you like, I'm like a Lord of the Rings fan, and if you think of like the elven cities, it's like kind of futuristic, but also wise and practical, but also aesthetic. And I think that there's a lot of like we have to like the train's already on the track, so like you're not going to turn off Ubers, you're not going to turn off the fact that like shopping malls are going to have AI giving you advertisements that apply to you. Like you're not going to turn that off. But what you can do is kind of integrate it all and realize that like we can make really sleek trams that are run on AI. Yeah. We can make like beautiful buildings that the AI can run simulations for and figure out what is going to be most beautiful to build the architecture as. The AI can figure out the right structural materials that have a certain, like the AI can combine certain materials and figure out what's the right composite. So like AI is going to be part of this. It's not just going to be a return to like this ancient like beauty of architecture, like ancient Greece. Like we're just too far gone from that. We're too far ahead of that. But that doesn't mean that you can't integrate things. And I think it's like we're valuing open spaces. We're valuing good traffic flow. Like New York City's congested and it's dirty. Like we don't want that. I want robots to clean the windows. I want robots to power wash the buildings that need to be power washed. So like we can take the values of the classicism and then combine it with modern technology to implement the values. Yes. So the human's job is to define that. Like we want walkable cities. Cool. How do we make an AI define the street so that traffic doesn't jam up on the rest of the, if you just turned New York City into a walkable city, traffic would be horrible on the few streets remaining. Mm-hmm. Like we need AI to make everything a little bit smoother and more efficient so that we are free to implement the values we want to implement. That's what I think.
I agree with you, I think I agree with you 100. Well, I'm not even going to say a but. I'm going to say an and. I agree with you on AI. Like, I'm by no means a Luddite. And I think that what we are forgetting or missing is that there's a built component to all this. Now, you can say, well, justice, like, we can use AI to build the things. And that's true, right? Like, it would be much cheaper to have a robot 3D print, in an ornate sort of plastic, or not plastic, but, printed, like crown molding or whatever you're building, a pillar, whatever you're building. And yet the societal problem then becomes, well, what do you do with the class of people who aren't smart enough to develop AI, who aren't, who are not, the knowledge class. And so I think there's always going to be this kind of, it doesn't matter how smart we are, the engineering class can never solve these like root problems in society because we don't even address the root problems of the failings of the human heart.
So I think to answer that, we have to go back to what I originally said about data importance in AI. So I want to speak of this the right way. So technology displaces jobs on average. It doesn't replace, in my opinion, but that doesn't matter to the actual blue-collar workers today that are going to lose their actual jobs, right? And, the book Sanction, if you haven't read it, definitely
I haven't read it yet.
You have to.
Is it really that good?
Yeah. Best book I've ever read.
Really? The best book you've ever read?
And I've read Nietzsche. I read all of Nietzsche's, too. It's kind of got a Zarathustra feel, but it's modern. It's kind of poetically written, but it really tackles modern issues. Anyway, I don't want to plug Roman's book too much because that's not why I'm here. But
I'll have to have him on the show.
He doesn't talk to anyone. He went dark a year ago. Yeah, I'm like one of the last people he spoke to a few months ago. He's done. He's done with the world of the internet. Yeah,
what happened?
He's off.
What happened?
Everyone on Twitter was too fake to him. His people who thought they were loyal to him ended up not actually being loyal to him when shit hit the fan and he got an issue with the FBI.
Was he at January 6th?
No. I'm talking like a year ago. He just had a beef with someone online and called them out and threatened the person to like actually have violence against them. The FBI came to his compound in the forest. He had to deal with them, and he's just like, "Fuck all this Twitter shit. I'm done with the internet." But he wrote his magnum opus first, Sanction, and he got it out there. It's on Amazon.
And there's a sequel too, right?
It's a trilogy.
Oh, there's a trilogy. Okay.
There's 3.
Okay.
And each book is a little different. He writes them differently and a little bit poetically different. Anyway, but he lives on the woods. He hunts his own food. Like he's off the grid, 100% off the grid. But anyway, so his point is like you can't just like say like to a freaking like blue collar oil worker who's like this jacked guy like, oh well, just code AI. Like that's impractical to say. But I think the way to look at it is use the AI to develop tools like a hammer. We just need an advanced hammer so that the construction workers are still doing the actual blue-collar, strong work, but they have easier tools for them. The oil rig maybe is a little bit safer, and they have tools like an automatic wrench or an automatic like distance calculator, whatever it is they need, an automatic like warning system to see if the oil is going to bubble up and destroy, kill someone. Like I don't think you eliminate the jobs. Like you still have the window cleaners because that's the low level work, but you give them better tools to use. And then the people who kind of can be knowledge workers, the younger crowd who might have fallen into blue collar work, they can actually train and help maintain AI systems. So I think there is going to be work for people, and you have to be compassionate to both sides. The people who want to build the smarter tools, the people who don't want to be replaced by a robot, but also the young people who aren't highly skilled laborers. They need something to do too. They need to be training AI systems.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
So it sounds like what you're suggesting is that we don't use AI to optimize sort of discrete. I mean, well, you're saying two things. It sounds like, yes, you use AI to optimize discrete sort of functions of behavior for the worker, et cetera. But you're also saying as a society, we optimize our deployment of those solutions such that we empower all people. I really truly believe, like I'm firmly, Christian conservative on the right. And I really think that one of the blind spots of the other side is that while they claim to really support the like marginalized classes or people who are sort of born with characteristics that make it impossible for them to succeed, they don't actually ask the hard question of like what is a sustainable way of supporting these people. Like it's not just giving people money and houses and stuff that doesn't give you meaning in life. It just gives you the bare minimum for survival. Like what you actually have to provide them with is the meaning in their life. Like, you know, I mean, Voltaire figured it out in the 1800s or whenever he wrote it. He basically said, look, like I'm a hedonist, I'm an atheist, but I want to live in a world full of Christians so that like dumb people don't just come and rob me. Right? Like,
I think I like the crypto and the gig economy for that. I know some like low-level people in my life, and they love the fact that they can just pick up DoorDash orders. Like, it's not meaningful, but it's work. It's kind of honorable work, but like it's the gig economy can let people pick up jobs. Like, oh, you need to train 1,000 images of cats versus dogs. Cool. You need to deliver someone's food. Cool. Like stuff that you don't need to be highly skilled for or a knowledge worker for. I think the gig economy is a good solution for that.
Oh yeah, I think the gig economy. I think we're gonna the trade economy more broadly speaking. I mean, when we talk about architecture, art, you can't build. I've said this over and over. Stained glass cathedrals, right? Stained glass skyscrapers of stained glass cities of columns and ornate, beautiful architecture. You can't build all that without a human being's hand on the hammer and with the chisel.
But we can make smarter hammers.
You can make smarter hammers. You can make smarter chisels. You can make projectors that show you the design and where to go. You can even make a machine to do it for you, right? And yet, like a human being, training human beings how to do that is probably the fastest, most efficient way to get us from, where we are now in terms of, postmodern brutalist buildings that are terrible. And
well, like think of Amazon. So Amazon's very AI friendly, right? One of the cool things Amazon does is their AI tells you if, like the people who package the boxes for Amazon deliveries in the warehouses, the AI will tell you if you're using this wrist too much. So you're not developing carpal tunnel.
Wow.
It says time to switch wrists. It optimizes things but you still need the human workers packaging the boxes.
Well, and is Amazon aesthetic?
No. Maybe.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
My first instinct was to say no, right?
Right. Well, okay. I'll put this out there. I believe that aesthetics are objective. And that's why you were so quick to respond.
You can't look at a sewage plant and say that's beautiful. No one would think that.
Right. And so like the question is, the glorious future that I hope for is one where we are both efficient and yet constantly pushing ourselves to farther and yet still providing for a richness of experience and meaningful life for all people. The dumb person, the smart person, I love this word neurodivergent because it's like, I love that word because have you noticed that all the neurodivergents seem to converge at the same political opinions? Why is that? It's
ironic.
It's so ironic that the neurodivergents all think so similarly.
Tend to converge.
Yeah.
The neurodivergents tend to converge.
Yeah.
It's the neurotypicals who tend to diverge. Ironic.
It's the neurotypicals who have disagreements. Yeah. It's fascinating how that turns out. I'm going to get canceled for those statements. Dr. Toad. We could keep going. I mean, we really could keep going. We'll do another show.
Let's do another
show. I'm going to get this out probably tomorrow. What a great conversation. You're just an inspiration to me. I love you're basically like 10 years ahead of me in your career. And I really appreciate your time. Is there anything here that you, critical feedback, anything that I could do better here? You won't hurt my feelings. Please be brutally honest.
I'm trying to think. This is a feedback on both of us. I think people who do podcasts focus a lot on the esoteric cool stuff, but I don't know if listeners like that. I can't tell. They might not. Like one of the feedbacks, I was on Soulbra's Soulcast, and we spent like a long time talking about like esotericism stuff. And I got some feedback that people kind of wanted to hear more about AI and less about the esotericism. So I don't know like how much time to spend on like chaos theory or simulation theory. Not not because it's not interesting, but it's a niche audience, and I don't know. It's also an unanswerable question. So you could spend 10 hours discussing it and get nowhere. So I think it's like, and I'm working on this myself. It's like, esotericism is cool to talk about, but I don't know if the listener likes that or how much time is spent on it. What do you think? It's not really feedback, more of a discussion.
Well, we're coming from two different kind of perspectives, which is why I think it's interesting. Esoteric, and also, what do I think about that? Okay, I will be honest with you. I wanted to make a show that is high value over the long term, right? Like, okay. I don't like podcasts that are fluffy and just sort of chit chat. And I see that a lot with technical podcasts, and so that's why I'm kind of shying away from a technical podcast. But
I don't like that either.
Yeah, but I don't want to shy away from technical subjects, because I think getting deep into technical subjects, which we kind of skimmed through today, but like when you're doing like a webinar, like if we were going to do another one, maybe that's more like instructive, like maybe we do a screen share and like really go through some code and stuff like that. Like, I'd like to do that too. So but on the other hand, I think the important questions in life are metaphysical questions. Like, I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ. Like, I think about these things as being, and also this presuppositional apologetic has been persuading me that there is no other rational means through which you can view the world, which I've been suspecting for a while now, but I didn't realize other people had written about it. Isn't that like the greatest conceit of youth, that you think that this idea that you have in your head is somehow like original, when you like definitely someone has written it down before? Like, you were talking about Nietzsche, and I remember reading Nietzsche for the first time, and he's saying that how all philosophers are basically just philosophizing to justify their
own weaknesses.
Yeah, to justify their weaknesses or whatever they want to believe. Yeah, and that's what philosophy is. And then Nietzsche basically sidestepped the whole question by not trying to answer, by not saying, "Oh, this is what I believe and want to justify." He just was analyzing the philosophy itself. And then this guy who I'm reading now, Cornelius Van Til, he kind of does the same thing by looking at the debate about God and saying, "Well, what if we're looking at this all wrong? Instead of debating God on the basis of evidence and empiricism, why don't we just say that, not like the empiricist, the materialist, and his empirical arguments, none of them make any sense according to their own worldview? Like, who cares? Like, who cares what the world is made out of if we're all just matter? Who cares? Like, what?
Like, it would be a moot discussion.
Nothing matters. Well, nothing matters. Like, in a purely material world, nothing matters. I mean, we're just,
it's just rocks and cells and like flesh, and that's it.
Yeah, we just evolved, right? We're animals, and that's it. And the thing is that, like, so in that worldview is so patently absurd on its face. I don't even know. I understand why we're talking about it still, but I think that we are actually the theist that goes to the discussion with the atheist to try to persuade him or have like a sort of like a one-to-one conversation. He can have that conversation, but you can't have it on the atheist's terms, because the atheist's terms are prima facie ridiculous. Like, they don't make any, like, he's making moral claims without a moral framework. He's making logical claims without a logical framework. He's making abstract claims without an abstract framework. The whole thing immediately falls apart. At least if you go to a Hindu or something, he's got some kind of metaphysic that you can at least interact with. But the atheist doesn't have a metaphysic. So what are you talking about? Like, none of it makes any sense. So anyway, I to not talk about that stuff, I think it's going to go over some people's heads. I think, I don't understand it well enough to be a super compelling speaker on the subject either. But to not have the conversation when it's the most important thing to talk about would also seem irresponsible. Anyway, I don't know. We'll see the episode when it comes out. We'll get feedback from people. But it is super helpful to hear it from you too, that you're thinking about it, because we could have gone in a much more practical direction. And
not just that, I like the direction we went. I feared if we spent any more time talking about it, we would have been going in circles and been preachy. You don't want to be preachy, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to be.
So I think we spent but you like it as the preacher, but the audience doesn't always want to hear that either, right? So it's like, I think we spent the right amount of time on it, and I'm glad we started. Like, it's just so easy to just get lost in it and then spend no time on other topics. So I think it's good that we were cognizant of being able to switch topics.
Yeah.
It's just so easy to get lost in chaos theory, theism, psychedelic. Like,
there's one more thing I wanted to run by you on chaos theory, because you mentioned it a couple times. Do you remember maybe a year or two ago when they came out with that paper about how chaos theory explains why everybody's either a hipster or a preppy person?
No, I never read that.
You never? Okay, so I'm not mathematically inclined, but basically the argument was that that you get a polarized fashion dialectic because, like, the preppy people are all aspiring towards sort of like an ideal that's like outside of themselves, and the hipsters are basically rejecting that. And so when the hipster tries to reject it, they always go to the exact polar opposite of the ideal, which is why all hipsters kind of look the same, and why all preppy people also all kind of look the same. Yeah, and the only people that look really like not like one of those two are just some like weird kind of spectrum in the middle. And usually it's like the only people I can tell that really fall outside of the spectrum are like mentally ill people, right? Like you see like a homeless person and it's like, well, they're neither preppy nor hipster because they're just outside of that conversation, right? And then but the visual example that they used was actually the Jurassic Park example, where you've got a drop of water on your hand, and chaos theory is basically saying that, like, you know, this is a dynamic system and that it's very delicate, and like the slightest tremor will cause the water droplet to roll off, right? And so it's the same concept, is that like even our cultural predispositions are just, you know, there's like a stable place to be, and then any kind of disruption forces people's opinions to like the most like a radical, untenable place. Anyway, I gotta find that paper. It was really interesting seeing it applied to fashion, because you realize if you can apply this to fashion, you can kind of apply it.
That's true.
Yeah,
fashion is like the definition of like a materialistic view. To apply chaos theory to that is interesting.
Dr. Toth, thank you so much for your time. I'll catch you on Twitter. Is there anything else I can do for you while we're on?
No, we're good, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being the guest, and yeah, I'll catch up with you later. All right.
All right. Bye.
Adios.